Lira Voss had always known her place in the Ashfall Pack. She stood at the back during gatherings, spoke only when spoken to, and never once asked why her family had been pushed to the edges of pack life. Her mother had taught her to keep her head down and her voice quiet. It was safer that way. Or so she believed. The Ashfall territory stretched across miles of pine forest and rocky hills, protected for generations by strong alphas who demanded loyalty above all else. Alpha Dorian Ashfall ruled with a calm, controlled manner that made people trust him at first glance. He rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. His word was law, and everyone in the pack understood that questioning him came with consequences. Lira worked in the pack's healing house, tending to the injured and comforting the sick. It was humble work, but she found peace in it. She liked being useful. She liked feeling, even in a small way, like she belonged somewhere. That peace shattered on an autumn evening when the pack elders called an emergency meeting. Word had come from the Blackthorn woods, the wild land beyond Ashfall's borders. The Rogue King, a wolf named Kael, ruled that territory with a reputation that made even seasoned warriors uneasy. Stories about him spread through every pack in the region. Some called him ruthless, others called him untouchable. No one dared to challenge him directly. For years, an uneasy peace had existed between Ashfall and Blackthorn, held together by a treaty neither side fully trusted. That treaty had just collapsed. A group of Ashfall scouts had crossed into Blackthorn territory without permission, and Kael considered it a serious offense. He sent a message back with the wounded scouts: send someone to answer for it, or prepare for war. Alpha Dorian gathered his most trusted advisors that night. Lira wasn't part of that circle, but she overheard enough from the hallway outside the meeting room. They needed someone to send. Someone whose loss wouldn't matter much to the pack. She didn't think of herself when she heard those words. She never imagined her name would come up. The next morning, she was summoned to Dorian's study. He sat behind his desk, calm as always, his expression unreadable. "Lira," he said, "I have a task for you, an important one." She stood a little straighter. "Of course, Alpha." "You'll be traveling to Blackthorn," he continued. "You'll represent Ashfall and help smooth things over with Kael. Consider it an honor. Not many are trusted with something this delicate." Something in his voice didn't match his words. It was too smooth, too rehearsed. But Lira had spent her whole life trusting the pack's decisions, so she nodded. "I won't let you down," she said. Dorian gave a small, satisfied smile. "I know you won't." It wasn't until she was already on the road, escorted by two guards who barely looked at her, that the truth began to sink in. The guards exchanged glances she wasn't meant to see. One of them, a younger wolf named Finn, looked at her with something close to pity. "They didn't tell you everything, did they?" he asked quietly, once they were far enough from the packlands that no one else could hear. Lyra's stomach tightened. "Tell me what?" Finn hesitated, glancing at his older companion, who stared straight ahead and said nothing. Finally, Finn spoke, his voice low. "Kael didn't ask for a messenger. He asked for someone to answer for what happened. A sacrifice, to prove the pack takes the treaty seriously. Alpha Dorian chose you because no one important would miss you." The words landed harder than she expected. Not because they surprised her, but because some quiet part of her had always feared this, that she was replaceable, that no one would fight for her if it came down to it. She thought of her mother, who had said nothing when Dorian gave the order. She thought of the healing house, of the people she had cared for, none of whom had come to see her off. She said nothing for the rest of the journey. There was nothing left to say. The border of Blackthorn was marked by a line of ancient, twisted trees, their branches forming a kind of natural gate. The guards stopped there, unwilling to go further. "This is as far as we go," the older guard said. "Kael's people will meet you from here." Lira looked at the darkening woods ahead of her. Fear pressed against her chest, but she refused to let it show. She had spent her whole life being quiet and careful. If this was how her story ended, she decided she would at least walk into it standing tall. "Go," she told them. "I'll be fine." She wasn't sure she believed it, but saying it out loud helped. The guards left without another word, and Lira walked alone into the woods. She hadn't gone far when figures emerged from the trees, silent and watchful. They didn't attack her. Instead, they simply surrounded her, and led her deeper into the territory, toward a large stone lodge built into the side of a hill. It looked less like a fortress, and more like something ancient, weathered by time, but still standing strong. Inside, seated near a fire, was Kael. He was younger than she expected, though his presence filled the room in a way that made him seem larger than life. His eyes were sharp, assessing her carefully as she was brought before him. She braced herself, ready for whatever punishment awaited her. But he didn't move to harm her. Instead, he studied her for a long moment, his brow furrowing slightly, as though he were trying to place something familiar. "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Lira," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Lira Voss." Something shifted in his expression at the sound of her surname. He rose from his seat and stepped closer, studying her face, her eyes, in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. "Voss," he repeated quietly. "I didn't think that name still existed." Lira frowned. "It's just my family name. It doesn't mean anything." Kael tilted his head. "It means more than you know." He didn't explain further that night. Instead, he ordered that she be given a room and left alone. Lira spent the night confused and unsettled, waiting for something terrible to happen. But nothing did. No punishment came, no violence, just silence, and the strange weight of Kael's reaction to her name. Over the following days, Lira slowly realized she wasn't being treated like a prisoner. She was given food, a private space, and even simple tasks to keep her occupied. Kael avoided her for the first few days, as though he needed time to think. When he finally sought her out again, he asked her questions about her family, her childhood, what she knew about her ancestors. She didn't know much. Her mother had rarely spoken about their past, always brushing off questions with vague answers. But Kael seemed to know more than she did. "Your bloodline used to be respected," he told her one evening, as they sat near the fire. Long before Dorian's family rose to power, the Voss line was known for something rare, a kind of strength tied to the earliest wolves. From the time before packs split into rigid hierarchies, some called it the mark of the first moon. Lira almost laughed. "That sounds like an old story, not something real." "Maybe," Kael said. "Or maybe it's a story people wanted forgotten, because it threatened the power certain families built for themselves." He explained, carefully and without exaggeration, that families like the Ashfalls had risen to power partly by erasing bloodlines that could challenge their authority. The Voss family, once respected, had been slowly pushed down through generations, stripped of status, forgotten, made to feel small, until no one questioned their place at the bottom. It was a lot to take in. Lira had spent her whole life believing she simply wasn't important. Hearing that her family's low status might have been engineered, rather than natural, shook something deep inside her. "Why does this matter to you?" she asked. "Why help me understand any of this?" Kael considered the question carefully. "Because power built on lies eventually crumbles. And because you deserve to know the truth about who you are, regardless of what happens next." Over the following weeks, Lira began to change. She spent time training with Kael's people, not for battle, but to understand her own strength, something she had never been taught to explore. She discovered a resilience in herself she hadn't known existed, a calm confidence that grew with each passing day. She and Kael grew close during this time, not through grand gestures, but through quiet conversations and shared understanding. He didn't see her as someone beneath him, the way Dorian always had. He saw her as someone capable, someone whose voice mattered. Word eventually reached Ashfall that Lira hadn't been harmed. Whispers spread through the pack. The sacrifice hadn't died. Some began to ask questions about why she had been sent away in the first place. Dorian, sensing his authority slipping, knew he needed to act quickly before the truth unraveled everything he had built. He gathered his warriors and marched toward Blackthorn, determined to silence the growing doubts before they spread further. He told his pack this was about protecting Ashfall's honor. In truth, it was about protecting his own position. When Dorian arrived at the border, he expected to find the frightened, quiet wolf he had sent away. Instead, he found Lira, standing beside Kael, calm and unshaken, her presence carrying a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. "You came back to finish what you started," Lira said, her voice steady. Dorian's expression flickered with surprise, quickly masked by irritation. You were supposed to disappear quietly. Instead, you've caused problems I now have to fix." "I didn't cause anything," Lira replied. "You did, the moment you decided my life was worth less than your comfort." Dorian's warriors shifted uneasily behind him, sensing the tension in the air. Some of them had known Lira for years. They had seen her kindness in the healing house, her quiet dedication to the pack. Doubt crept into their expressions as they listened. Dorian tried to regain control of the situation, speaking with practiced authority. "This is pack business. Step aside, Lira, before this becomes something neither of us wants." But Lira didn't step aside. Instead, she spoke clearly, so that everyone present could hear. "You sent me here because you thought no one would miss me. You didn't expect me to survive, let alone find the truth about my family. My bloodline wasn't weak. It was silenced, so families like yours could stay in power without question." Murmurs spread through Dorian's warriors. Some looked at their alpha with new uncertainty. Dorian's composure cracked slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," Lira said, "and so will everyone else, if you force this to become something worse than it needs to be." For a long moment, no one moved. Dorian looked around at his warriors, searching for support, but found only hesitation. The story Lira told matched too many quiet truths they had never dared question. The way certain families always stayed in power, the way others were always pushed aside without explanation. Finally, one of the senior warriors stepped forward, lowering his gaze respectfully toward Lira, before speaking to Dorian. "Alpha, if this is true, we need answers, not more secrets." Dorian realized, in that moment, that he had lost control of the narrative he had spent years carefully building. Without the fear that once kept his pack obedient, his authority weakened rapidly. He left Blackthorn that day without the confrontation he had planned, returning to Ashfall to face a pack now full of questions he could no longer avoid. In the following months, the truth about the Voss bloodline spread throughout the Northern Territories. Families who had once looked down on Lira now saw her differently. She was offered a place of honor within Ashfall, a chance to reclaim status that had been stolen from her family long ago. But Lira chose a different path. She remained in Blackthorn, working alongside Kael to build something new, an alliance between their territories, based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than fear and control. Together, they worked to ensure no one else would be treated the way she once had been, discarded and forgotten, simply because those in power found it convenient. Lira Voss, once overlooked and underestimated, became known throughout the region not as a sacrifice, but as someone who had risen, quietly and steadily, into exactly the kind of strength no one had expected her to find.